I always imagined my life would turn out differently, I whispered, staring at the faded photograph in my hand. The image of a smiling young couple, arms around each other, filled with dreams and endless possibilities, stared back at me. That was us, David and me, fresh out of college, believing we had the world at our feet. We were so full of hope, so certain that our love and ambition would carry us through anything. Growing up, I had pictured myself living in a cozy house, with a happy family and everything in its right place. It was a vision that had sustained me through the long years of school, through the challenges and uncertainties of young adulthood. It was a dream that had felt so real, so within reach, that I never doubted it would come true. But as I sit here now, in this dimly lit apartment, I realize how far I am from the life I once envisioned. The walls of this tiny space seem to close in on me, and the silence is suffocating. There is no laughter, no warmth, only the cold reality of what my life has become. I was always the type of girl who believed in fairy tales. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and life seemed simple. My parents had a marriage that I admired, steady, loving, supportive. They had their struggles, of course, but they always faced them together. I wanted that too. I wanted the white picket fence, the children playing in the yard, the happy husband who would come home every evening with a smile. As a child, I would spend hours daydreaming about my future. I pictured myself as a teacher, surrounded by children's laughter, coming home to a loving family at the end of the day. I imagined holidays filled with warmth and joy, a house filled with love and light. It was a simple dream, but it was mine. But now, as I look around this tiny apartment, I realize that the dream I once had is nothing more than a distant memory. The cozy house has been replaced by these four walls, the happy family by a broken marriage, and the sense of fulfillment by a deep, unshakable emptiness. Where did it all go wrong? How did the life I had envisioned slip so far out of reach? I met David during our sophomore year of college. He was the kind of guy who could light up a room with his smile, full of big ideas and even bigger promises. I was instantly drawn to him. He had this magnetic energy about him, a confidence that was both intoxicating and intimidating. We met in a psychology class, of all places. It was one of those required courses that neither of us had much interest in, but we ended up being paired together for a project. From the moment we started working together, there was a connection. We spent hours talking, not just about the project, but about our lives, our dreams, our future. David had a way of making everything seem possible. He talked about starting his own business, about traveling the world, about living a life that was anything but ordinary. I was captivated by his vision, by the way he seemed to believe that the world was just waiting for us to take it by storm. Our relationship moved quickly. By the end of that semester, we were inseparable. David was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, charming, ambitious, and full of life. He made me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered. When he proposed to me on the day of our graduation, it felt like the culmination of everything we had been working towards. We were young, in love, and ready to take on the world together. Our wedding that summer was a small, intimate affair, surrounded by our closest friends and family. It was the happiest day of my life, a day filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future that seemed so bright. After the wedding, we moved to the city, filled with excitement and hope. David had landed a job at a promising tech startup, and I had secured a position as a teacher at a local elementary school. It felt like everything was falling into place, just as I had always imagined. The city was a whirlwind of energy and opportunity. We spent our weekends exploring, discovering new restaurants, parks, and hidden gems. Life was good, and we were happy. But it didn't take long for the first cracks to appear in our perfect picture. Our first apartment was small but charming. It was in a vibrant neighborhood, close to David's job and my school. We didn't have much money, but we made do with what we had. The furniture was a mix of hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, but it felt like home. David's job at the startup was demanding, but he loved it. He would come home late, excitedly talking about the projects he was working on, the potential for growth, the possibilities that seemed endless. I was proud of him, proud of the man I had married, proud of the future we were building together. But as the months went by, the demands of his job began to take a toll. The long hours, the constant pressure to perform, the uncertainty of the startup world, it all started to wear on him. He became more irritable, more distant, less the man I had fallen in love with and more a stranger who came home late and left early. I tried to be supportive, tried to remind him of the dreams we had shared, but it was as if a wall had gone up between us. He was consumed by his work, and there was little room for anything else. My own job was challenging as well. Teaching had always been my passion, but the reality of the classroom was far more difficult than I had anticipated. The students were unruly, the administration unsupportive, and the hours long. I found myself staying late to grade papers, to plan lessons, to try to keep up with the demands of the job. The passion I had once felt for teaching began to dwindle, replaced by frustration and burnout. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and it began to affect my relationship with David. We argued more often, about money, about his job, about my job, about the future that seemed less and less certain. As the months turned into years, the pressures of work, finances, and the city's relentless pace began to take their toll. David and I were drifting further apart, our once vibrant connection now buried under the weight of unmet expectations and daily struggles. It felt like the more we tried to hold on to our dream, the more it slipped away from us. One night, after yet another argument over David's late hours and my growing frustration with teaching, I broached the topic of starting a family. I thought it might bring us closer together, give us a renewed sense of purpose, and help us rediscover the love that had once been so strong. Maybe a baby is what we need, I suggested cautiously as we sat on the couch, the tension between us thick in the air. Something to remind us of why we fell in love in the first place. David looked at me with tired eyes, his expression unreadable. A baby, he repeated, almost as if he was testing the word on his tongue. Do you think that's a good idea, given everything we're dealing with right now? I hesitated, knowing that his concerns were valid. But I was desperate for something to change, for something to bring us back to the couple we once were. I do, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I think it could be the start of something good for us. David sighed, leaning back on the couch and closing his eyes. I don't know, Sarah. It feels like we're barely holding it together as it is. What if bringing a baby into this makes things worse? I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Or what if it makes things better? We've always talked about having a family, about raising kids together. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for the perfect moment and just go for it. He didn't respond right away, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing the pros and cons. Finally, he opened his eyes and nodded. Okay, he said quietly. Let's try. And so, we did. We threw ourselves into the idea of starting a family with renewed hope. The first few months were filled with excitement and anticipation. We talked about baby names, decorated a nursery in our minds, and imagined the joy of holding our child for the first time. But as the months turned into years with no sign of a pregnancy, that excitement slowly turned into anxiety. Every month brought a new wave of disappointment, and each negative test felt like a punch to the gut. We tried to stay positive, but the strain was beginning to show. David became more distant, throwing himself into work to avoid dealing with the mounting pressure at home. I tried to stay strong, but the emotional toll was overwhelming. My self-worth became tied to my ability, or inability, to conceive, and I found myself slipping into a deep depression. Finally, after nearly 2 years of trying, we went to see a specialist. I remember sitting in the cold, sterile doctor's office, holding David's hand tightly as we waited for the results of the tests. When the doctor finally delivered the news, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I'm sorry, the doctor said, his voice soft and full of sympathy. But the tests show that you're unlikely to conceive naturally. There are options we can explore, but it will be a difficult and potentially costly process. I stared at the doctor, his words echoing in my mind like a cruel joke. Unlikely to conceive. Difficult. Costly. It was as if every hope I had clung to was being stripped away, leaving me with nothing but the cold, hard reality of our situation. David didn't say anything as we left the office, his face a mask of stoic resolve. I wanted to reach out to him, to find comfort in his arms, but I didn't know how. I felt like I had failed him, failed myself, failed us. The next few months were a blur of doctor's appointments, fertility treatments, and endless waiting. Each new cycle brought a fresh wave of hope, only to be dashed by another negative test. The treatments were invasive, expensive, and emotionally draining. Our bank account dwindled, our patience wore thin, and our relationship began to fray at the edges. Eventually, after several failed attempts, we decided to explore adoption. We attended seminars, filled out paperwork, and met with agencies. But the process was slow and filled with its own set of challenges. There were long waiting lists, stringent requirements, and no guarantees. Each obstacle felt like another door slamming in our faces. I tried to stay hopeful, to believe that something would work out eventually. But with each passing month, the light at the end of the tunnel grew dimmer. David and I were fighting more than ever, our once strong connection reduced to a threadbare bond barely holding us together. One night, after yet another heated argument, David finally voiced what we had both been avoiding. "Maybe it's time to stop," he said, his voice flat and exhausted. "Maybe this just isn't meant to be." I stared at him, my heart breaking at the resignation in his voice. "You're giving up?" I asked, my own voice shaking with emotion. He looked at me with weary eyes. "I'm not giving up, Sarah. I'm just tired. I'm tired of hoping and being disappointed. I'm tired of fighting with you. I'm tired of watching us fall apart." The truth of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was tired too. Tired of the constant disappointment, the endless strain, the feeling that our lives were spiraling out of control. But the idea of letting go, of admitting defeat, felt like a betrayal of everything we had once dreamed of. What if we just took a break? I suggested, desperate to find some middle ground. We don't have to give up completely, but maybe we need to step back and focus on us for a while. We've been so consumed by this, that we've forgotten about each other. David nodded slowly, as if considering my words. "Maybe you're right," he said finally. "Maybe we do need to take a step back." And so, we did. We put the adoption process on hold, stopped the fertility treatments, and tried to reconnect with each other. But it was easier said than done. The wounds left by our failed attempts to start a family were deep, and the scars they left behind made it difficult to bridge the gap that had grown between us. We went through the motions, trying to recapture the love we had once shared, but it felt forced, like we were playing roles we no longer believed in. The dream that had once brought us together had turned into a nightmare, and neither of us knew how to wake up from it. As the months passed, the distance between David and me grew even wider. We were like two strangers sharing the same space, going through the motions of life without truly living it. The hope that had once sustained us was gone, replaced by a deep, unshakable despair. David began spending more time at work, using it as an escape from the tension at home. His job as a delivery driver was a far cry from the promising career he had envisioned, but it was the only work he could find after the tech startup he had been so excited about collapsed. The long hours and low pay only added to his frustration, and he came home each night exhausted and defeated. I took on more shifts at the diner, trying to make ends meet, but it was a constant struggle. The bills piled up, and our savings dwindled. The financial strain added another layer of stress to our already fragile marriage. We fought about money constantly, about how much we were spending, about how little we were earning, about the future that seemed increasingly uncertain. The move to the small, run-down apartment was a last resort. We could no longer afford the rent on our previous place, and this was all we could manage. The apartment was cramped and dark, the walls thin enough that we could hear the neighbors arguing late into the night. The heating barely worked, and the paint was peeling off the walls. It was a far cry from the home I had once dreamed of. The neighborhood was rough, a place I never imagined I would live. I avoided going out after dark, and even during the day, I felt a constant sense of unease. The sound of sirens was a regular backdrop to our lives, a reminder of how far we had fallen. But the worst part wasn't the apartment or the neighborhood, it was the sense of hopelessness that permeated everything. The feeling that no matter what we did, things were never going to get better. The life we had envisioned, the dreams we had shared, all seemed so distant, so unattainable. David and I barely spoke anymore. When we did, it was only to argue, and the arguments were always about the same things: money, our lack of children, the jobs we hated. There was no joy left in our marriage, no connection, no love. We were two people living separate lives, trapped by the choices we had made and the dreams that had slipped through our fingers. I tried to hold on, to believe that things would eventually get better, but it was hard. So much had gone wrong, and there seemed to be no end in sight. The weight of it all was crushing, and I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the pressure of it all. One particularly harsh winter, the heating in our apartment finally gave out. We couldn't afford to fix it, so we bundled up in layers and tried to stay warm. The cold seeped into my bones, a constant reminder of how far we had fallen. It was the final straw for me, the moment when I realized that the life I had dreamed of was never going to happen. I looked around at the cold, dark apartment, at the man who had once been my partner but was now a stranger, and I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of loss. The dream I had held on to for so long was gone, and all that was left was the cold, hard reality of a life that had turned out so differently than I had ever imagined. The night our heating failed was the turning point, the moment when everything I had been holding on to finally crumbled. The apartment was freezing, the cold seeping through every crack and crevice, a physical manifestation of the emotional coldness that had settled into our marriage. David and I were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, wrapped in blankets, our breath visible in the frigid air. The silence between us was heavy, oppressive, filled with all the things we hadn't said, all the resentment and bitterness that had been building up for years. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. David looked up at me, his expression blank. "Do what?" "This," I said, gesturing around the apartment. "This life. This marriage. It's not what I wanted. It's not what we wanted." He didn't respond right away, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to come up with something to say. But when he finally spoke, his words were flat, emotionless. "I don't know what you want me to say, Sarah. We tried. We did everything we could. But maybe this is just how it's supposed to be." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "How it's supposed to be?" I repeated, incredulous. "David, this isn't living. We're just existing. We're going through the motions, pretending like everything's okay when it's not." He sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. "I know. But what are we supposed to do? We've tried everything. Maybe it's time to accept that this is our life now." I shook my head, refusing to believe that this was all there was. "I can't accept that. I won't. There has to be something more, something better. I don't want to spend the rest of my life like this." David didn't respond, just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The man I had once admired for his strength and determination was gone, replaced by someone who had given up, who had let life beat him down until there was nothing left. And in that moment, I realized that I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep living a life that was killing me slowly, day by day. I couldn't keep holding on to a marriage that was already dead. "I think we should separate," I said finally, the words hanging in the air between us like a guillotine ready to fall. David looked up at me, his eyes wide with surprise. "Separate?" he repeated, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I think it's the only way. We're not happy, David. We haven't been happy in a long time. And I don't see how things are going to get better if we keep pretending like everything's okay." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the emotions warring in his eyes: anger, sadness, fear. But when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, resigned. "Maybe you're right," he said. "Maybe it is time to let go." Leaving David was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was also the only one that made sense. I couldn't keep living a life that was tearing me apart, and I couldn't keep holding on to a marriage that had been dead for years. The day I packed my bags and left our apartment was surreal. I had spent so many years building a life with David, dreaming of a future that would never come, and now I was walking away from it all. The apartment, cold and empty, seemed to echo with the ghosts of what could have been. David didn't try to stop me. He helped me carry my bags to the door, his face a mask of stoic acceptance. We didn't say much, there wasn't much left to say. The words that could have saved us had been left unsaid for too long, and now it was too late. As I walked out of the apartment for the last time, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, relief, fear, hope. I was stepping into the unknown, leaving behind everything I had known for the past decade, and I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It was modest but clean, a fresh start. I decorated it with the few things I had taken with me from our old place, but I didn't bother trying to recreate the life I had left behind. This was a new beginning, and I wanted it to be completely different from what I had known. The first few weeks were the hardest. I felt a deep sense of loss, not just for the marriage that had ended, but for the dreams that had died with it. I had spent so long trying to build a life with David, trying to create a future that was rooted in the past, and now I was left with nothing but the pieces of a life that had never turned out the way I had hoped. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to find my footing. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine of my job. I took on more shifts at the diner, working long hours to keep my mind off the loneliness that threatened to consume me. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years, and found comfort in their support. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain of what I had lost was almost too much to bear. But I kept moving forward, one step at a time, determined to create a life that was meaningful, even if it wasn't the one I had once dreamed of. Starting over was a slow, painful process, but it was also a chance for me to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the dreams I had once clung to so tightly. I had spent so long defining myself by my relationship with David, by the future we had planned together, that I had forgotten who I was on my own. I threw myself into my work at the diner, taking on more shifts and responsibilities. The work was hard and the hours long, but it gave me something to focus on, something to keep me grounded as I navigated this new chapter of my life. I found a strange sense of comfort in the routine of it all, in the knowledge that I was contributing something tangible to the world. But work wasn't enough to fill the void left by the end of my marriage. I knew I needed more than just a job to rebuild my life, so I began to explore other avenues. I started taking evening classes at a community college, courses in art and literature, subjects that had always interested me but that I had never had the time to pursue. Those classes became a lifeline for me, a way to reconnect with the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of unmet expectations and broken dreams. I found joy in learning again, in creating something beautiful with my own hands. It reminded me that there was still so much more to life, so much more to me, than the narrow definition I had once imposed on myself. As I began to rebuild my life, I also started to reconnect with old friends. People I had lost touch with over the years, friends from college, colleagues from my teaching days, reached out to me when they heard about my divorce. At first, I was hesitant to reconnect, unsure of what to say or how to explain everything that had happened. But I soon realized that I didn't need to explain anything. These people cared about me, and they were there to support me, no questions asked. We would meet for coffee, or drinks, or just to catch up. We talked about everything and nothing, reminiscing about the past, sharing stories about our lives now. It was comforting to know that I wasn't alone, that there were people who had known me before David, who could help me remember who I was before everything had fallen apart. One of those old friends, Emily, became a particularly close confidant. We had been roommates in college, but life had taken us in different directions after graduation. She had married and moved out of state, and we had drifted apart over the years. But when she heard about my divorce, she reached out, and it was like no time had passed at all. Emily was a constant source of support and encouragement during those early months of rebuilding. She listened to me vent, cry, and question everything, always offering a kind word or a piece of advice when I needed it most. She reminded me that it was okay to grieve, to feel lost, but also that I had the strength to move forward, to create a new life for myself. As time went on, I began to find a new rhythm in my life. The days weren't as heavy as they once were, and I started to see glimmers of hope in the future. I wasn't the same person I had been before, but I was beginning to accept that. I was beginning to embrace the changes, to see them not as losses, but as opportunities to grow and evolve. With each passing day, I grew more comfortable in my new life. The pain of the past was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer consumed me. I had begun to find purpose again, to see the possibilities in the life I was building for myself. One of the biggest shifts in my mindset came when I realized that I needed to redefine what success and fulfillment meant to me. For so long, I had measured my worth by my ability to achieve the life I had once dreamed of, a happy marriage, a family, a stable career. But those goals were no longer relevant to the person I had become, and I needed to let go of them in order to move forward. I began to focus on the things that brought me joy in the present, rather than the things I had once thought I needed to be happy. My art classes became a source of inspiration and fulfillment, a way for me to express myself and connect with others who shared my interests. I started painting regularly, experimenting with different styles and techniques, and even participated in a local art show. The sense of accomplishment I felt from creating something with my own hands was unlike anything I had experienced in years. Work at the diner also took on new meaning. It was no longer just a way to pay the bills, it became a way for me to contribute to my community, to connect with people from all walks of life. I found that I enjoyed the interactions with customers, the camaraderie with my coworkers, and the sense of purpose that came from doing a job well. I even took on some managerial responsibilities, helping to train new staff and organize events. It wasn't the career I had once envisioned, but it was fulfilling in its own way. Through it all, I continued to work on my own emotional healing. I began seeing a therapist who helped me unpack the grief and anger I had been carrying for so long. She encouraged me to confront the pain of my infertility, to acknowledge the loss and let myself grieve, rather than burying it under layers of denial and bitterness. It was a difficult process, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my emotions, to cry for the children I would never have, for the marriage that had ended, for the dreams that had died. But in allowing myself to grieve, I also began to find acceptance. I began to see that my worth wasn't tied to my ability to have children or to be the perfect wife. I was enough, just as I was. As I continued to heal, I also began to open myself up to new possibilities. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping to organize art classes for children and adults. It was a way for me to give back, to share the skills I had developed, and to connect with others who were also looking for a sense of purpose. The community center became a second home to me, a place where I could be myself and make a difference in the lives of others. I formed new friendships, found new sources of inspiration, and began to see the world in a different light. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was a life that was rich and meaningful in its own way. As time went on, I grew more comfortable in my new life. I had built a routine that brought me joy and fulfillment, and I was finally beginning to feel like myself again. But as much as I had grown and healed, there was still a part of me that longed for connection, for the kind of love and companionship that I had once dreamed of. It was during one of my art classes at the community center that I first met Mark. He was a new participant, having recently moved to the area, and he had signed up for the class as a way to meet people and explore his creative side. From the moment we met, there was an easy, natural rapport between us. He was kind, thoughtful, and had a dry sense of humor that I found incredibly charming. At first, I kept our interactions strictly professional, focusing on helping him with his art and making him feel welcome in the class. But as the weeks went by, I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the way he made me laugh and think. There was a spark between us, one that I hadn't felt in a long time, and it both excited and terrified me. One evening, after class had ended and everyone else had left, Mark stayed behind to help me clean up. As we worked together, the conversation flowed easily, moving from art to life to the little things that made us who we were. There was a comfort in talking to him, a sense of ease that I hadn't experienced in years. As we finished up, Mark turned to me and said, "I was wondering if you'd like to grab a coffee sometime. I've really enjoyed our conversations, and I'd like to get to know you better." I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. It had been so long since I had even considered the possibility of dating, of letting someone new into my life. The thought of it was both exhilarating and terrifying. But as I looked into Mark's kind, open eyes, I realized that maybe it was time to take a chance, to open myself up to the possibility of something new. I had spent so long rebuilding my life, finding my own strength and purpose, and now maybe it was time to share that with someone else. "I'd like that," I said finally, a small smile tugging at my lips. Mark's face lit up with a smile of his own. "Great. How about this weekend?" "Sounds perfect," I replied, feeling a flutter of excitement in my chest. As we parted ways that evening, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, there was still room in my life for love, for connection, for a new beginning. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was a life that was full of possibilities, and that was enough. My first coffee date with Mark was the beginning of something unexpected, something that I hadn't dared to hope for but that quickly became an important part of my life. We met at a small cafe not far from the community center, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. From the moment we sat down, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, our favorite books and movies. We laughed about the quirks of small-town life, shared stories from our pasts, and found ourselves lingering over our empty cups long after the coffee had gone cold. There was a connection between us, one that felt natural and easy, and I found myself drawn to Mark in a way that I hadn't been to anyone in years. He was thoughtful, kind, and attentive, with a quiet confidence that put me at ease. But there was also a vulnerability about him, a sense that he too had been through his share of struggles and was still figuring out how to move forward. As our date came to an end, Mark walked me to my car, the evening air cool and crisp around us. We stood there for a moment, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. "I had a really great time tonight," Mark said, his voice warm and sincere. "I'd love to do this again sometime." "Me too," I replied, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. "How about dinner next time?" "Sounds perfect," he said, his eyes lighting up. "I'll call you?" "Looking forward to it," I said, feeling a flutter of excitement in my chest. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a sense that maybe I was finally ready to open myself up to the possibility of love again. It had been so long since I had allowed myself to feel this way, to let someone new into my life, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I continued to see each other, our dates becoming more frequent and our conversations more personal. We shared our fears, our hopes, our pasts, and our dreams. We talked about the things that had shaped us, the things we were still working through, and the things we wanted for our future. Through it all, Mark was patient and understanding, never pushing me to move faster than I was comfortable with. He respected my need for space, for time to process my feelings, and he was always there to listen, to support, and to encourage me. As our relationship deepened, I began to realize that I had found something truly special in Mark. He wasn't just a new love interest, he was a partner, a friend, someone who understood me in a way that few people ever had. He made me feel safe, valued, and cherished, and I found myself looking forward to our time together more and more. But even as I allowed myself to fall for Mark, there was still a part of me that was hesitant, that was afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past. I had been hurt before, had my dreams shattered, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to fully trust someone again. One evening, as we sat on the porch of my apartment, sipping wine and watching the stars, I voiced my fears to Mark. "I really care about you," I said, my voice soft and hesitant. "But I'm scared. I've been through so much, and I'm afraid of getting hurt again." Mark reached out and took my hand, his grip gentle, but firm. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. I'm not going anywhere." His words brought tears to my eyes, and I felt a surge of emotion that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. It was a feeling of hope, of possibility, of the chance for something new and beautiful to grow. "I'm not going anywhere either," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "I want to see where this goes." And with those words, I made the decision to fully open my heart to Mark, to take the risk and see where our relationship could lead. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was a life that was full of potential, and I was ready to embrace it. As Mark and I grew closer, our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. We became each other's confidants, sharing our innermost thoughts, fears, and dreams. We spent our weekends exploring new places, trying new activities, and simply enjoying each other's company. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to build something new and meaningful. But life, as it often does, had other plans. One day, as I was finishing up a shift at the diner, I received a phone call that would change everything. My mother, who had been in declining health for the past few years, had taken a turn for the worse. She had suffered a stroke and was in the hospital, her condition critical. I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding with fear and worry. When I arrived, I was met by my father, his face pale and drawn with anxiety. The doctors had done everything they could, but the prognosis was grim. My mother was unconscious, and they weren't sure if she would wake up. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, sleepless nights, and a constant sense of dread. I spent every moment I could by my mother's side, holding her hand and talking to her, even though I wasn't sure if she could hear me. The thought of losing her was almost unbearable, and I felt like I was being pulled back into the darkness that I had fought so hard to escape. Mark was a constant source of support during that time. He visited me at the hospital, brought me meals, and made sure I was taking care of myself. He held me when I cried, listened when I needed to talk, and gave me space when I needed to be alone. He was there for me in every way, and I was grateful for his presence. But as the days turned into weeks, and my mother's condition remained unchanged, I began to feel a growing sense of despair. The uncertainty of it all was overwhelming, and I found myself questioning everything, my decisions, my future, my ability to handle the challenges that life kept throwing at me. One evening, as I sat in the hospital waiting room, exhausted and emotionally drained, Mark sat down beside me and took my hand. "I know this is incredibly hard," he said gently. "But I want you to know that you're not alone. I'm here for you, no matter what happens." I looked at him, my eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared, Mark. I don't know if I can handle this. It feels like everything is falling apart again." "You're stronger than you think," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "You've been through so much, and you've come out the other side. You can get through this too. And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." His words gave me the strength I needed to keep going, to keep fighting for my mother and for myself. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I had someone by my side who believed in me, who was willing to stand with me through whatever came next. In the end, my mother did wake up, but she was never the same. The stroke had left her with significant impairments, and she would need long-term care and rehabilitation. It was a difficult reality to face, but I was determined to do everything I could to support her. Mark stood by me through it all, helping me navigate the challenges of my mother's care, and supporting me as I dealt with the emotional toll it took on me. Our relationship grew stronger through the trials we faced, and I realized that I had found something truly special in Mark, someone who was willing to walk beside me through the darkest of times. In the months that followed my mother's stroke, life settled into a new routine. I divided my time between work, visiting my mother, and building my relationship with Mark. It wasn't easy, but I was learning to find balance, to find moments of peace and joy amidst the challenges. As I spent more time with my mother, helping her through her recovery, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. My life had taken so many unexpected turns, and the dreams I had once held so tightly had changed in ways I never could have imagined. One afternoon, as I sat by my mother's bedside, we talked about the past, about the life she had lived and the choices she had made. She had always been a strong, independent woman, someone I had looked up to and admired. But as we talked, I realized that she too had faced her share of disappointments and heartaches, that her life hadn't turned out exactly as she had planned. "I always thought I'd have more time," she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. "More time to do the things I wanted, to be with the people I loved. But life doesn't always work out the way we expect, does it?" I shook my head, tears filling my eyes. "No, it doesn't. But you've lived a good life, Mom. You've done so much, been there for so many people. You should be proud of that." She smiled weakly, reaching out to take my hand. "I am proud. But I also wish I had taken more chances, lived more fully, without worrying so much about what others thought. Don't make the same mistake, Sarah. Don't let fear hold you back." Her words stayed with me long after that conversation, a reminder that life was too short to be lived in fear or regret. I had spent so many years trying to live up to an ideal, to create a life that matched the image I had in my head, but in doing so, I had lost sight of the present, of the opportunities that were right in front of me. As I continued to reflect on my journey, I realized that I needed to let go of the past, to release the dreams that no longer served me, and to embrace the life I was living now. I needed to stop comparing myself to an ideal that didn't exist and start appreciating the beauty and richness of the life I had built. I also began to see that my relationship with Mark was different from what I had experienced before. It wasn't about chasing a dream or trying to fit into a mold, it was about being present, being real, and being open to whatever life had to offer. Mark accepted me for who I was, flaws and all, and that allowed me to do the same for him. We talked about our future, about the possibility of marriage, of building a life together. But this time, there was no rush, no pressure to follow a specific timeline or meet certain expectations. We were both content to take things one day at a time, to enjoy each other's company and see where life took us. Through it all, I learned that life doesn't always turn out the way we expect, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful and fulfilling in its own way. It's about finding joy in the present, embracing the unexpected, and being open to the possibilities that life has to offer. As the years went by, Mark and I continued to build our life together. We moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood, a place where we could create new memories and build a future that was uniquely ours. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was a life that was rich with meaning and filled with love. We settled into a routine that was comfortable and fulfilling. Mark continued to work in his job as an engineer, while I split my time between the diner and my art. I had even started selling some of my paintings at local galleries, and it gave me a sense of accomplishment and pride that I hadn't felt in a long time. Our relationship grew stronger with each passing year. We faced our share of challenges, difficult times at work, health scares, and the ongoing care of my mother, but we faced them together, with a sense of partnership and commitment that I had never experienced before. Mark was my rock, my confidant, my best friend, and I knew that I could rely on him no matter what. But as much as we loved each other, we were both aware that life was full of uncertainties. We had learned that lesson the hard way, and it had made us appreciate the present, the small moments of joy and connection that made life worth living. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our home, watching the sun set over the trees, Mark turned to me and said, "I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again. After everything that's happened, I wasn't sure it was possible. But I'm so grateful that I met you, Sarah. You brought so much light into my life." I smiled, my heart swelling with emotion. "I feel the same way. I never thought I'd find someone like you, someone who understands me and loves me for who I am. You've made me believe in love again, and I'm so thankful for that." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, the sky turning shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. There was a sense of peace between us, a quiet contentment that came from knowing that we were exactly where we were meant to be. But as much as I cherished the life we had built, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come, on the journey that had led me to this point. I had faced so many challenges, so many disappointments, but I had also learned so much about myself, about what it meant to live a fulfilling life. I had learned that life doesn't always turn out the way we expect, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful and meaningful in its own way. It's about embracing the present, finding joy in the small moments, and being open to the possibilities that life has to offer. Mark and I may not have had the perfect, fairy tale life that I had once dreamed of, but we had something real, something that was built on trust, understanding, and love. And that was enough. As we sat there on the porch, watching the stars come out one by one, I realized that I had found a new kind of happiness, one that was rooted in the present, in the life I was living now, rather than in the dreams of the past. And I knew that no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it with an open heart and a sense of hope, knowing that I had built a life that was rich with meaning, love, and possibility. As Mark and I continued to build our life together, I found myself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought me to this point. It hadn't been an easy road, and there had been times when I wasn't sure I would make it through. But now, as I looked back on all that had happened, I realized that every challenge, every disappointment, every moment of pain had led me to where I was today. I had learned to let go of the dreams that no longer served me, to embrace the life I was living now, and to find joy in the present. I had found a partner who understood me, who loved me for who I was, and who was willing to walk beside me through whatever life had to offer. And for that, I was deeply grateful. But as much as I cherished the life I had built, I knew that the future was still uncertain. Life has a way of surprising us, of throwing us curveballs when we least expect it. And while I couldn't predict what was to come, I knew that I was ready to face it with an open heart and a sense of hope. Mark and I had talked about the future many times, about the possibility of marriage, of growing old together, of continuing to build a life that was full of meaning and love. But we had also come to accept that life doesn't always go according to plan, and that it was important to stay flexible, to be open to whatever the future might bring. One evening, as we sat by the fire in our living room, Mark turned to me and said, "I've been thinking a lot about the future lately. About what we want, where we're going. And I realized that, more than anything, I just want to be with you. Whatever happens, as long as we're together, I know we'll be okay." I looked into his eyes, feeling a deep sense of love and gratitude for the man who had become such an important part of my life. "I feel the same way," I said softly. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you, no matter what." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, the warmth of the fire casting a soft glow over the room. There was a sense of peace between us, a quiet understanding that we were in this together, no matter what challenges or surprises the future might bring. As I thought about the years ahead, I found myself feeling a sense of excitement, of anticipation for what was to come. I knew that there would be challenges, that life would continue to throw us curveballs, but I also knew that I had the strength and resilience to face whatever came my way. I had learned so much about myself over the years, about what it meant to live a fulfilling life, and I was ready to continue that journey, to keep growing, learning, and evolving. The dreams I had once held so tightly had changed, but they had led me to a life that was rich, full of love, and filled with meaning. As I sat there with Mark, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, I realized that I was exactly where I was meant to be. My life had turned out differently than I had ever imagined, but it was more beautiful and fulfilling than I could have ever hoped for. And I knew that, no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it with an open heart, knowing that I had built a life that was rich with meaning, love, and possibility. Life has a way of surprising us, of taking us down paths we never could have predicted. Just when I thought I had finally found my footing, that I had built a life that was stable and fulfilling, the unexpected happened. It started with a phone call, one that I never saw coming. It was from David, my ex-husband, the man I had left behind when I decided to start over. I hadn't heard from him in years, and the sound of his voice on the other end of the line sent a shiver down my spine. "Sarah, it's me, David," he said, his voice hesitant and unsure. "I know it's been a long time, but I need to talk to you. There's something you need to know." My heart skipped a beat, a mixture of emotions swirling inside me, anger, fear, curiosity. I had moved on from that chapter of my life, had rebuilt myself from the ground up, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to reopen old wounds. "What is it, David?" I asked, my voice steady but cautious. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I've been diagnosed with cancer. It's advanced, and the prognosis isn't good. I don't have much time left, and I wanted to reach out to you, to make amends, to find some closure before it's too late." The news hit me like a freight train, the words echoing in my mind as I struggled to process what he had just told me. Cancer. Advanced. Not much time left. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie, and I wasn't sure how to react. I don't know what to say," I stammered, my mind racing. "I'm so sorry, David. I don't know what to do." "I don't expect you to do anything," he said quietly. "I just wanted to tell you, to let you know what's happening. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about our marriage, about everything that happened. And I realized that I never really gave you the closure you deserved. I was too wrapped up in my own pain, my own failures, to see how much I had hurt you. I'm sorry, Sarah. For everything." His words were like a balm on an old wound, soothing the lingering pain and resentment that I had carried with me for so long. I had spent years trying to move on from the hurt, trying to rebuild my life, but there was always a part of me that had never fully healed. "I appreciate you saying that," I said softly. "I've done a lot of healing on my own, but it means a lot to hear you say those things. I forgive you, David." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the emotion in his voice when he spoke again. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more to me than you'll ever know." We talked for a while longer, catching up on the years that had passed since our divorce. He told me about his struggles, his regrets, and the things he wished he had done differently. I listened, offering what comfort I could, but I knew that there was only so much I could do. When we finally said our goodbyes, I hung up the phone feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. I had never expected to hear from David again, had never imagined that he would re-enter my life in this way. But as much as it had shaken me, I also felt a sense of closure, of finally putting to rest the ghosts of my past. When I told Mark about the conversation, he was supportive and understanding, as always. He held me as I processed the news, offering words of comfort and reassurance. "You've come so far, Sarah," he said gently. "You've built a life that's full of love and meaning. Don't let this pull you back into the past." "I won't," I replied, feeling a sense of determination. "I've worked too hard to let anything undo what I built. I'm ready to move forward, no matter what." And so, with the unexpected twist of David's return, I found myself once again reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. Life had taken me down so many unexpected paths, had thrown so many challenges my way, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined to live a life that was true to myself. The dreams I had once held so tightly had changed, but they had led me to a life that was rich, full of love, and filled with meaning. And for that, I was deeply grateful. As I looked ahead to the future, I knew that there would be more surprises, more twists and turns, but I was ready to face them with an open heart and a sense of hope. I had built a life that was uniquely mine, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. In the months following my conversation with David, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the concept of closure and the ways in which we move forward from the past. It wasn't just about letting go of old wounds, it was about embracing the present, about finding peace in the life I was living now. David's illness and our conversation had stirred up old memories, old emotions that I thought I had buried long ago. But instead of letting them drag me down, I chose to use them as a catalyst for growth, for deeper understanding of myself and the journey I had been on. I realized that closure wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending that it hadn't happened, it was about acknowledging it, making peace with it, and then choosing to move forward. It was about understanding that the experiences I had gone through, both good and bad, had shaped me into the person I was today. Mark was a constant source of support during this time, as always. He understood that I needed time to process everything, to work through the emotions that had resurfaced. He gave me the space I needed, but he was always there when I needed to talk to share my thoughts and feelings. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself growing more at peace with the past. The anger, the hurt, the disappointment that had once defined my relationship with David had faded, replaced by a sense of acceptance and understanding. I had forgiven him, but more importantly, I had forgiven myself, for the choices I had made, for the dreams that hadn't come true, for the life that had turned out differently than I had expected. I also began to appreciate the life I had built with Mark even more. We had created something truly special, something that was rooted in trust, understanding, and love. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was a life that was rich, full of meaning, and deeply fulfilling. One evening, as we sat together in our living room, Mark turned to me and said, "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what we want. And I realized that, more than anything, I just want to continue building this life with you. Whatever comes our way, I know we can handle it together." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I feel the same way. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I'm ready to face it with you, no matter what. We sat there in comfortable silence, the warmth of the fire casting a soft glow over the room. There was a sense of peace between us, a quiet understanding that we were in this together, no matter what challenges or surprises the future might bring. As I thought about the years ahead, I found myself feeling a sense of excitement, of anticipation for what was to come. I knew that there would be challenges, that life would continue to throw us curveballs, but I also knew that I had the strength and resilience to face whatever came my way. I had learned so much about myself over the years, about what it meant to live a fulfilling life, and I was ready to continue that journey, to keep growing, learning, and evolving. The dreams I had once held so tightly had changed, but they had led me to a life that was rich, full of love, and filled with meaning. As we sat there, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, I realized that I was exactly where I was meant to be. My life had turned out differently than I had ever imagined, but it was more beautiful and fulfilling than I could have ever hoped for. And I knew that, no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it with an open heart, knowing that I had built a life that was rich with meaning, love, and possibility. Life, as I had learned, has a way of bringing us full circle, of leading us back to the places and people we thought we had left behind. As the years went by, I found myself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought me to this point, on the ways in which my life had changed, evolved, and grown. David passed away a year after our final conversation, and I was surprised by the depth of emotion I felt when I heard the news. It wasn't just sadness, it was a mixture of grief, nostalgia, and a sense of finality. David had been a significant part of my life for so long, and even though our marriage had ended, his presence had lingered in my thoughts, my memories. I attended his funeral, not out of obligation, but out of a sense of closure, of wanting to pay my respects to the man who had once been my partner, my confidant, my friend. It was a small, quiet service, attended by a few close friends and family members. As I stood there, listening to the eulogies, I couldn't help but reflect on the life we had shared, the dreams we had once had, and the ways in which we had both changed. After the service, I spent some time alone, walking through the cemetery, lost in thought. I thought about the young couple we had once been, full of hope and dreams for the future. I thought about the challenges we had faced, the ways in which our lives had diverged, and the paths we had taken. But most of all, I thought about the lessons I had learned, the ways in which I had grown and changed. I had spent so much of my life chasing a dream, trying to fit into a mold that didn't truly reflect who I was. But through it all, I had learned that life was about more than just achieving a specific goal, it was about the journey, the experiences, and the people who walked that journey with me. As I stood there, looking out over the rows of gravestones, I felt a deep sense of peace, of acceptance. David's passing marked the end of one chapter of my life, but it also marked the beginning of a new one. I had found closure, had made peace with the past, and I was ready to continue moving forward, to embrace the future with an open heart. When I returned home that evening, Mark was waiting for me, as he always was, with a warm embrace and a listening ear. We talked about the funeral, about the memories it had stirred up, and about the ways in which we had both grown and changed over the years. I'm so proud of you, Sarah, Mark said, his voice filled with love and admiration. You've come so far, and you've built a life that's full of meaning and love. I'm so grateful to be a part of that life. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I'm grateful too. I never could have imagined that my life would turn out this way, but I'm so glad it did. I wouldn't change a thing. And as we sat there, talking late into the night, I realized that I had come full circle. I had found a new kind of happiness, one that was rooted in the present, in the life I was living now, rather than in the dreams of the past. And I knew that, no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it with an open heart, knowing that I had built a life that was rich with meaning, love, and possibility. In the years that followed, life continued to bring its share of challenges and joys, but through it all, Mark and I remained steadfast in our commitment to each other and to the life we had built together. We faced health scares, the loss of loved ones, and the ups and downs of everyday life, but we faced them together, with a sense of partnership and love that only grew stronger with time. We celebrated milestones, both big and small, and found joy in the simple moments of everyday life. As I looked back on the journey that had brought me to this point, I realized that life had taught me so much about resilience, about the importance of embracing the present moment, and about the power of love and connection. I had learned that life doesn't always turn out the way we expect, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful and meaningful in its own way. It's about finding joy in the present, being open to the possibilities that life has to offer, and cherishing the relationships that bring us love and support. And as I sat on the porch of our home, watching the sun set over the trees, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life I had built, for the people who had walked this journey with me, and for the lessons I had learned along the way. Life, I realized, is a journey filled with twists and turns, with unexpected challenges and moments of joy. But it's also a journey that's rich with meaning, love, and the possibility of growth. And I was ready to continue that journey, with an open heart and a sense of hope for whatever the future might bring.